The bell above the shop door didn't just ring. It announced you. A soft chime, slightly off-key, like it had aged alongside the rest of us but dependable. Familiar, honest, for 42 years. I had heard that bell before anyone else, before. The sun came up. Before the street outside woke with traffic and footsteps and noise. It rang for me first. Every morning. Until the morning it didn't, that morning. I stood behind the counter like I always had, my hands resting on the worn wooden edge that had been smoothed not by polish but by time, by use, by life. My husband used to say that the counter held more stories than any book ever written. He built it himself, sanding every corner until there wasn't a single rough edge left. People will lean on this, he told me back then. Make sure it feels like they can. He was right. They leaned on it to laugh. To complain. To whisper things they didn't tell their own families, and I stood there through all of it. Until my own family decided I didn't belong there anymore. Mom, you don't have to do that. Calvin's voice came from behind me, smooth but firm, like someone trying to gently remove a splinter. I didn't turn around right away. I knew that tone. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision already made. I've always done this, I said quietly, still wiping the same spot on the counter I'd already wiped twice. That's the point, he replied. That made me pause, slowly. I turned. My son stood there in a crisp shirt I had never seen before, blue, perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. He didn't dress like that in the shop when he was younger. Back then he wore rolled-up sleeves, flour on his hands, ink stains on his fingers. Now he held a tablet, not a pen, not a ledger, a screen. Behind him, Melissa was adjusting the display again. She'd been doing that a lot lately. Moving jars, rearranging products. Changing labels I had written by hand and replacing them with printed ones. Uniform. Identical, lifeless, they look cleaner this way, she had said once. Cleaner. Like my handwriting was dirt. Mom, Calvin continued, stepping closer, lowering his voice as if he were explaining something delicate to a child. You don't need to stand all day anymore. It's not good for you. I've been standing here longer than you've been alive, I replied. Melissa turned at that, her smile already prepared. It's not about whether you can, she said gently. It's about whether you should. There it was, that shift. Not ability. Permission. I looked around the shop slowly. Everything was still here, but it didn't feel the same. The shelves were fuller, but colder. The air smelled less like familiarity and more like something processed. Even the light felt different. Sharper. Less forgiving. This place has always worked, I said. Melissa nodded, stepping forward with that same careful calm she always carried. It has, she agreed. But imagine how much better it could be. Better. Another word that sounds harmless, until you realize it means replacing what already exists. With what? I asked. With structure, efficiency, growth. None of those words included me. Calvin cleared his throat. We've been talking, he said. About the future, I folded my hands. Have you? It wasn't a question. They didn't notice, or maybe they did, and chose not to respond. We think it's time for you to step back, he said. Step back. Not leave. Not go. Just disappear slowly. And do what? I asked. Rest, Melissa said quickly. Rest. That word again. It followed me everywhere now. Like a polite way of saying you're done. I don't need rest, I said. Calvin exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder. As if I was the one creating the problem. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier. Cleaner. Instead, it came in pieces. Small, almost invisible changes that only hurt because they kept happening. First, they took the register. It's easier if we centralize payments, Melissa said. Then the supplier calls. Let us handle negotiations. Calvin added. Then the ordering system. Then the inventory. Then the keys. That one. I felt just for organization. Melissa explained. Organization. Everything had a word. Every removal came wrapped in something that sounded reasonable. Until all that was left was me. And even that seemed temporary. They gave me a chair. It was placed near the window. Not behind the counter. not near the register. Near the window. So you can still be part of things. Calvin said. Part of things, from a distance. I sat in it the first day because I didn't know what else to do. Customers came in, some noticed, most didn't. Good to see you. A few said, but they didn't come to me anymore. They went to Melissa, asked her questions, took her recommendations. Paid her, thanked her, and I sat there, smiling when someone looked my way, nodding when someone waved, like I had already become something to remember instead of something to rely on. 3 weeks later, they called me into the office. My office. Though it didn't feel like mine anymore. Melissa was behind the desk. That told me everything. Calvin stood beside her, not sitting, like he didn't know where he belonged either. Mom, he began carefully. We finalized some decisions. I looked at the desk. At the papers neatly arranged. At the pen placed perfectly on top. Prepared. Planned. Finished. Melissa slid the document toward me. This is just to formalize things, she said. Formalize. I picked it up. Retirement agreement. The words didn't blur. They didn't shake. They just sat there. Heavy. Permanent. You're removing me, I said. No, Calvin started, but stopped because there was no better word. Melissa didn't interrupt. She just watched. Confident. Certain. It's time, she said. Time. As if time decides these things. As if time had built that shop. As if time had stood behind that counter through sickness, through loss, through years when profit barely covered rent. I signed it. Not because I agreed, but because I understood something they didn't. You don't always fight when you're pushed. Sometimes you let people believe they've won. The next morning, I didn't go to the shop for 42 years. I had never missed a morning. Not for rain. Not for illness. Not even the day after my husband's funeral. But that morning, I stayed home. The silence felt wrong at first. Too large. Too empty. I made tea. Sat by the window. And for the first time in decades, I didn't have somewhere to be. That's when I noticed the letter. It had been sitting there for 2 days. Unopened. Unimportant. Until now. I picked it up, opened it slowly. And read. Once. Then a third time. My fingers tightened slightly on the paper. The building. The shop. It was being sold. Again. I leaned back in my chair, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter, something sharper. Understanding. I had sold the building years ago after my husband passed. It had seemed like the right thing at the time. Necessary. Practical. But I had never stopped caring about it. Never stopped watching. And now it was available again. I looked around my quiet kitchen. At the walls that had heard every version of my life. At the silence that now stretched where purpose used to be, and I smiled just a little. 3 weeks, that's all it took. 3 weeks of quiet movement. No visits to the shop. No arguments. No emotional conversations. Just action. Meetings. Documents. Phone calls, and one very careful decision. I didn't buy the building as myself. No. That would have raised questions, created resistance. Instead, I created something new, a company, a name no one would recognize. Simple. Professional. Distant. The kind of name people don't question, the kind of name that doesn't carry history. By the time the deal was finalized, everything was already in place. And then the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. I know that because Tuesdays used to be delivery days. Fresh stock. New orders. Busy mornings. Now, it was just another day I didn't go to the shop, but for them, it was the day everything changed. I wasn't there when Calvin opened the envelope, but I can imagine it. The slight crease in his brow, the way he always read things twice when something didn't make sense, the pause before he said anything out loud. Melissa would have noticed first. She notices everything. What is it? She would have asked, already stepping closer, and then he would have handed it to her, because that's what he does now. He shares decisions. Or maybe he hands them over. The building had officially been sold, ownership transferred, terms updated, Lease renewal required. With adjustments, necessary adjustments. They didn't call me that day. Not the next one either. At first. They tried to handle it themselves. Of course they did. That's what people do when they believe they're still in control. I heard about it from Mrs. Ahmed. She had been coming to the shop longer than Calvin had been alive. She called me that afternoon. Something's wrong, she said without greeting. Your son looks shaken. I stirred my tea slowly. Business has its moments, I replied. This is different, she insisted. That girl, your daughter-in-law, she's not smiling today. That almost made me laugh. Almost. I'm sure they'll manage, I said gently, but after I hung up. I sat there for a long time, not worried. Not nervous. Just aware. The first shift had happened. 2 days later. There was a second letter. This one was firmer. Clearer. A rent adjustment. Not outrageous, not cruel, but enough to demand attention. Enough to remind them ownership had changed. That's when Calvin came to see me. He stood outside my door longer than he needed to. I watched him through the window, the same way I used to watch him when he was a boy, trying to decide whether to admit he'd broken something. Some things don't change. Eventually.
He knocked. I opened the door before he could knock again. Mom.
His voice was different. Less certain. I stepped aside. Come in. He didn't sit at first. Just stood in the middle of the room, holding the envelope like it might explain itself if he looked at it long enough. The building's been sold, he said. I heard. They're raising the rent. I nodded. That happens.
He exhaled.
Sharply. Not frustrated, not angry. Just unsettled. They're not willing to negotiate, he added. I walked to the table and poured another cup of tea. Not everyone negotiates. I said. They won't even meet us, he continued. Everything is going through lawyers. I handed him the cup. Our fingers brushed. For a moment, he looked like he was about to say something else. Something real. But instead, what would you do? There it was, not a command, not a plan, a question. I looked at him carefully. At the man he had become. At the boy he used to be. And I said, I would read everything very carefully. He frowned slightly. That's it? That's where you start. He left not long after. Still holding the envelope, still searching for something that wasn't written on the paper. The third letter came the next day. Short. Direct. A meeting. Request. Mandatory. Time. 10 a.m. Location. Office of the building owner. That morning. I arrived early. Of course I did. I always arrive early. Some habits don't fade. They define you. The office was quiet. Minimal. Neutral. Designed to feel impersonal. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded. Calm. Not because I felt powerful, but because I felt certain. At exactly 10 a.m. The door opened. Calvin walked in first. Melissa right behind him, confident stride. Sharp eyes. Prepared. They both stopped. At the same time. Because they saw me. There are moments in life where silence says everything. This was one of them. Mom? Calvin said, barely above a whisper. I nodded once. Good morning. Melissa recovered first. She always does. Her expression didn't change much, but her posture did. Straighter. More alert. More
Careful. You're here, she said. Yes.
Another silence. Then Calvin asked the question he already knew the answer to. You own the building? I met his eyes. Yes. The room shifted, not loudly. Not dramatically. But completely. Melissa stepped forward slightly. That's unexpected, she said. You didn't ask. I replied, her lips pressed together briefly, just a flicker, but it was there. Calvin looked between. US. Confusion. Realization. Regret. All at once. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. I considered that. Then answered honestly. Because you told me I wasn't needed. The words didn't echo. They settled. Heavy. Final. But you still needed a roof. I added quietly. Melissa inhaled slowly. Then shifted. Back into control. Or at least trying to be. Well, she said, smoothing her sleeve slightly. Then we should discuss terms. Professional. Structured. Safe. I Nodded. Of course. I slid the lease across the table, not aggressive. Not punishing, but clear. Every line intentional. Every condition deliberate. No sudden restructuring without stability. I said, no removal of foundational practices without discussion. No decisions that ignore what built this place. Melissa read quickly, her eyes moving with precision. Calvin didn't read, he watched. It's fair, Melissa admitted after a moment. That wasn't easy for her to say. I could tell. I'm not here to take anything from you. I said. My voice softened slightly, but I won't be removed again. Calvin finally spoke. Mom, I didn't realize. No, I said gently. You didn't. Silence filled the space again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Melissa closed the document slowly, then looked at me. Really? Looked at. Not as an obstacle, not as something outdated, but as something necessary. I understand, she said. And for the first time, I believed her. Calvin exhaled a long breath. Like something inside him had finally settled. I'm sorry, he said. I looked at him. Not as the man who replaced me. But as the boy I raised. My place was never just behind that counter, I said quietly. It was in what held it all together. He nodded. Slowly. We signed a lease, not as enemies. Not even as opponents, but as something more complicated. Something real. I didn't take the shop back. I could have. Legally. Easily. But that was never the point. Power isn't about taking everything. It's about choosing what matters instead. I returned, not as someone being tolerated, not as someone being allowed to sit in the corner, but as someone whose presence had weight again. The first day I walked back into the shop, the bell rang. And this time it sounded right. Calvin looked up immediately. Not surprised. Expecting. Melissa nodded at me. Not politely. Respectfully. Something subtle had changed. Not in the shop. In them. Morning. Mom, Calvin said. Not, you don't have to do that. Not. You can rest. Just morning. I stepped behind the counter, placed my hands on the worn wood. Familiar. Steady. Mine. A customer walked in, looked at me. Smiled. Double quote. Good to see you back. I smiled. Too. Good to be back. Melissa approached me later that afternoon. Carefully. Not hesitant. Just aware I may have changed things too quickly. She said. I nodded. You changed things without understanding them. She accepted. That, didn't argue. That won't happen again, she said. And I believe that too. We didn't go back to how things were. That would have been impossible. Time moves forward. People change. But we built something new. Together. This time with balance. Some days Melissa leads, some days Calvin decides, and some days they ask. And that is the difference. The bell still rings, the shelves still shift, the systems still evolve, but the foundation? That stays, because some things aren't outdated. They're the reason everything else works. And sometimes people only understand that when they realize that they still need a roof. That's all for today's story. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is Storyova, where your story matters. And I'll see you in the next one.